A fog of despair. It was in the late autumn of '98 that a fog, thicker and more malevolent than any I could recall, descended upon London. It was a tangible presence, a greasy ochre shroud that coiled through the streets, muffling the clip-clop of hansoms and turning the familiar gas lamps into hazy, spectral glows. Within the warm confines of our sitting room at 221B Baker Street, however, the world was reduced to the crackle of the hearth, the scent of Sherlock Holmes's strong shag tobacco, and the endless task of indexing his recent cases. For my part, I found a certain comfort in this enforced isolation. The elements had, for a day, stemmed the ceaseless tide of troubled humanity that so often beat against our door. But for Holmes, such inactivity was a torment. He had paced the floor for hours, a caged panther of a man, his lean, hawk-like features drawn into a frown of intellectual starvation. He had alternately picked up his violin only to lay it down with a discordant sigh, dipped into his chemistry experiments with a listlessness that bordered on the perilous, and filled the room with acrid smoke and complaint. "Watson, the criminal classes of this city have lost all enterprise and originality," he declared, flinging himself into his armchair. "Consider the last 3 cases: a stolen cheque, a domestic squabble culminating in a thrown plate, and a tiresome business of a missing cat. It is the age of the mundane. The great villains are gone, replaced by a dreary succession of bunglers and petty thieves. One might as well be a grocer's assistant for all the intellectual stimulation on offer." I was about to offer some placating remark when the shrill summons of our doorbell cut through the fog-bound silence. It was a sharp, frantic peal, followed by another, betraying an agitation that promised something beyond a missing feline. Holmes sat bolt upright, his lethargy vanishing like mist in the sun. A spark ignited in his keen grey eyes. "At last, Watson, a summons from the world of men. Pray see who it is, Mrs. Hudson. I have a feeling the game is at long last afoot." A moment later, our landlady showed into the room, a figure so drenched in misery that she seemed to be the very incarnation of the wretched weather outside. She was a young woman, not uncomely, but her face was pale and blotched with weeping, her bonnet askew, and her cheap but tidy coat damp from the clinging fog. She stood twisting a pair of sodden gloves in her hands, her breath coming in ragged sobs. "Mr. Holmes," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "they told me. They said you were the only one who could help." "I am he," said Holmes, his voice softening from its former acerbic tone to one of professional courtesy. "And this is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson. You may speak as freely before him as you would to me. Pray take a seat by the fire. You are chilled to the bone." He gestured to the armchair opposite his own, and the woman sank into it. For a moment she could do nothing but stare into the flames, her shoulders shaking. "Take your time, my dear," Holmes said gently. "A cup of tea, perhaps?" She shook her head, swallowing hard. "No, sir. Thank you, sir. There ain't a moment to lose. It's my Bert. They've taken my Bert." "And who, may I ask, is Bert?" "Bert Stevens, sir, my fiancé." The name was followed by a fresh cascade of tears. "The police. They've arrested him. For murder." Holmes leaned forward, his long fingers steepled. The languor was entirely gone, replaced by an electric intensity. "Murder," he repeated, the word hanging in the air. "This is a more serious matter. Pray, compose yourself, Miss—" "Vance, sir. Eleanor Vance." "Miss Vance, compose yourself and furnish me with every detail. The police do not, as a rule, arrest a man for the ultimate crime without what they consider to be substantial evidence. Who is the unfortunate victim? A Lord Harrington, sir. A great man with ships and businesses. A terrible, powerful man. The name was certainly known to us. Lord Harrington was a titan of industry, a man whose reputation was as vast as his fortune, and whose character was said to be as hard and unyielding as the iron hulls of his steamships. "And what is your fiancée's connection to this nobleman?" Holmes inquired. "Bert works on the docks, sir, for one of Lord Harrington's companies. He's a good man, Mr. Holmes, the best of men. He wouldn't hurt a fly, I swear it on my mother's grave. But they say he did it. They say it's plain as day." "Tell me what they say," Holmes urged, his eyes narrowed to slits. "They say Lord Harrington was found this morning in his study, stabbed to death, and Bert's knife was the one that did it. His work knife with the notch in the handle. There's no mistaking it. And they say a man saw Bert running away from the house late last night, in the fog, and worse. Oh, Mr. Holmes, it's the worst of it. Bert owed his lordship money, a great sum. He'd borrowed it to help my mother when she was ill. He was paying it back every week, honest he was. But the police say it was a motive." She buried her face in her hands. "A knife, a witness, a motive. They say the noose is already around his neck, but he didn't do it. I know him. He was with me until 9 o'clock, and then he went for a pint at the Winking Dog with his mates. He couldn't have done it." Holmes remained silent for a full minute, his gaze fixed upon the crestfallen figure before him. I could see the intricate machinery of his mind beginning to whir, sorting and weighing the facts as presented. "The word of his mates at a public house may not weigh heavily with a jury, Miss Vance," he said at last, his tone analytical rather than unkind. "And you, as his fiancée, are considered a biased witness. This knife, was it one he carried often?" "Every day, sir, for his work, cutting ropes and the like." "And his lordship's study, was it broken into?" "The police said no. The window was ajar, that's all. They say Bert, knowing the house from making deliveries, must have slipped in." "A dock worker making deliveries to a lord's private study? It seems improbable," Holmes mused, more to himself than to us. He stood up and resumed his pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Vance," he said, stopping abruptly, "you believe in his innocence without reservation?" "With all my heart, Mr. Holmes." "Then I must ask you for a fee. My expenses are not inconsiderable." The girl's face fell. "Sir, I have little money, but I can work. I will pay you every penny I earn for the rest of my life, if you can just save him." Holmes waved a dismissive hand. "I do not require your life's earnings, madam. A single sovereign will suffice for my immediate needs. The true payment, should I succeed, will be the satisfaction of seeing justice done. Now, I require one more thing from you, an exact description of this Bert Stevens. His height, his build, his manner of dress, and, most particularly, any distinguishing features or habits." For the next 10 minutes, Miss Vance, with a lover's precision, painted a portrait of her fiancé. A man of medium height, powerfully built from years of labour, with honest brown eyes, a quiet disposition, and a tattoo of an anchor on his left forearm. He habitually wore a plain woolen cap and a heavy tweed coat against the riverside chill. When she had finished, Holmes nodded slowly. "Thank you, Miss Vance. You have been most lucid. I cannot promise a favourable outcome, for the facts as you present them are indeed formidable. However, I will promise to look into the matter. Where the police see a straight line, I often find a tangled knot. Go home. Speak to no one. I will be in touch." He showed her out with a courtesy that one might have afforded a duchess. When he returned, the fire of intellectual battle was blazing in his eyes. "Well, Watson," he said, rubbing his hands together. "What do you make of it?" "A most damning case, Holmes," I replied. "The evidence seems overwhelming. A poor girl's faith is no match for a murder weapon and a witness." "Perhaps, Watson, perhaps. And yet it is all a little too neat, is it not? A little too perfect. A known weapon, a known debtor, a witness. It is the very simplicity of the thing that arouses my suspicion. The amateur culprit is often trapped by the complexity of his own designs, but the master craftsman, he relies upon a simplicity so blatant that the police, in their eagerness, cannot see past it. We must go to Scotland Yard at once. I should like to hear this story from the lips of our good friend, Inspector Lestrade. There is nothing so informative as observing a man who is supremely confident in his own erroneous conclusions. The triumphant inspector. Our hansom cab battled through the suffocating gloom, emerging from the murk onto the Thames embankment. The imposing granite edifice of New Scotland Yard loomed before us, its windows aglow, a beacon of order in the chaotic city. Even before we entered, I felt the familiar thrill of the hunt, that heady mix of intellectual curiosity and the scent of danger that was the very essence of an adventure with Sherlock Holmes. Inspector Lestrade, a man whose wiry, ferret-like energy I had long come to associate with a certain brand of official self-satisfaction, received us in his small, cluttered office. He was, as Holmes had predicted, in a state of high triumph. "Holmes and Dr. Watson!" he exclaimed, gesturing for us to take the only 2 spare chairs, which were laden with files. He swept them to the floor with a clatter. "Come to congratulate me, have you? The Harrington case. Wrapped it up in less than 6 hours. A record, even for me." "I have heard some of the particulars," Holmes said, seating himself and arranging his long coat with care. "It struck me as a case of some interest, and I thought I might hear the official account from you." "Official and final, Holmes, official and final," Lestrade preened, leaning back in his chair. "There's nothing for you here. The man's as good as hanged. Bert Stevens, a docker. Lord Harrington was found by his valet at 8 this morning, dead in his study. Stabbed once, clean through the heart. No sign of a struggle. The window leading to the garden was unlatched. Stevens had made deliveries of port and such to the house before, so he knew the layout." "And the time of death?" Holmes inquired. "Our man, the police surgeon, puts it between 10 and midnight last night. And we have a witness, a cabby, who saw a man matching Stevens's description vaulting the garden wall at around 10:30. Said he was running like the devil himself was after him." "In this fog?" Holmes asked quietly. "He could make a positive identification?" Lestrade waved a dismissive hand. "The fog wasn't so thick out Kensington Way last night. He saw him clearly enough under a gas lamp, described his cap and coat perfectly. But that's not the half of it, Holmes. The murder weapon. We found a nasty-looking knife, a real pig sticker, still lying on the Persian rug, not 5 feet from the body. Covered in blood, of course. We took it down to the docks, and a dozen men identified it on the spot. "That's Bert Stevens's knife," they said. "We'd know that notch anywhere." He paused for dramatic effect. "And the motive? Stevens owed Harrington the better part of £50. A fortune for a man like that. Harrington was a hard man, known to call in his debts without mercy. Stevens must have gone to plead for more time, been refused, lost his temper, and, well, the knife did the rest. A simple, sordid crime of passion and poverty. Open and shut. You have interviewed Stevens, of course. Sang like a canary, Lestrade scoffed. Denied everything, naturally. Claimed he was at the Winking Dog in Wapping. We checked. He was there, right enough, but his pals are all sots who can't rightly say if he left at 10 o'clock or was there till closing. A useless alibi. The man is a fool as well as a murderer. Holmes had listened to this recital with an expression of intense concentration, his eyes closed for much of it, as if to absorb the information more keenly through his other senses. "You mentioned the valet, Lestrade," he said, opening his eyes. "What was his testimony?" "Name's Fields. Been with the family for 40 years. Utterly devoted. Found the body. He's half mad with grief. Said his lordship had no enemies apart from every competitor he'd ever ruined, every man he'd ever dismissed, and every society mother whose daughter he'd jilted. But no one with a grudge like Stevens's. No, it's the docker, right enough." "And the study itself? Was anything taken?" "That's the odd part," Lestrade admitted, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. "Harrington was wearing a diamond pin worth 1,000 guineas. His gold watch was on the desk. A wallet full of banknotes in his breast pocket. Nothing was touched. That's what makes me think it wasn't robbery. It was rage. Pure, simple rage." "Or," Holmes murmured so softly I could barely hear him, "it was designed to look that way." "Tell me, Inspector, was there anything at all out of the ordinary in the room? Any smell, any object displaced, however trivial?" Lestrade shrugged. "It's a rich man's study, Holmes, full of books, papers, heavy furniture. There was a faint smell, a bit like, well, like a chemist's shop. But the valet said Harrington sometimes used strange chemicals for cleaning his antique coins. Nothing else. The room was neat as a pin, save for the body and the knife. No broken china, no overturned chairs. None. It was as if Harrington sat there and let the man stab him." "Intriguing," Holmes said, rising to his feet. "You have done a capital job, Lestrade. Your reasoning is, as always, a model of directness. I wonder if you would object to my glancing at the scene of the crime myself. There is a small point of academic interest concerning the coagulability of blood on different carpet fibres that I should like to investigate." Lestrade puffed out his chest, flattered by the praise, however backhanded. "By all means, Holmes, but don't go trampling over my evidence. Not that it matters. We have our man. I'll send a constable to let you in." "You are most obliging," Holmes said, pulling on his gloves. "Come, Watson, we have a lesson in carpet fibres to attend to." As our hansom rattled westward, Holmes was uncharacteristically silent, lost in thought. "Well, Holmes," I ventured at last, "does Lestrade's account not convince you?" He gave a short, dry laugh. "My dear Watson, Lestrade has built a house of cards upon a foundation of sand. He has a knife, a witness, and a motive. But what does he truly have? The knife is identified as belonging to Stevens. But is there any proof that Stevens was the one who wielded it? A witness sees a man in a docker's coat and cap in London in autumn that describes a small army of men. And the motive? £50. It is a sum, I grant you, but is it a sum to murder a man for, a man who is your employer and holds your entire future in his hands, especially when, by his fiancée's account, the debt was being steadily repaid? But the combination of the three, Holmes, is precisely what makes me suspicious, Watson. It is too perfect a picture. Imagine you wish to frame a man. You would steal his most identifiable possession, a unique knife. You would ensure you were dressed in his typical attire. And you would make certain the world knew of a plausible motive. The killer has not merely committed a murder, he has authored a narrative, and it is my task to find the flaws in his prose. No, Watson, this is no simple crime of passion. There is a cold, calculating intelligence at work here, and Bert Stevens is but a pawn in a much deeper, darker game. His words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn air. The fog of London seemed to have crept into the very heart of the case, obscuring a truth far more monstrous than the one Lestrade so proudly believed he had uncovered. The whispers of a room. The Harrington residence was a vast, cheerless mansion in Kensington, its stone facade soot-stained and forbidding. A uniformed constable, clearly briefed by Lestrade, admitted us with a deferential nod and led us through a cavernous, echoing hall to the study. The body, he informed us, had been removed, but otherwise nothing had been disturbed. He posted himself by the door as Holmes and I entered, and I felt the immediate oppressive silence that always lingers in a place of recent violence. It was a library more than a study. Bookshelves stretched to the ornate plaster ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A great mahogany desk stood before a bay window that overlooked a sodden, lifeless garden. A decanter of sherry and a single glass stood on a side table. And on the floor, in the centre of a magnificent Aubusson carpet, was a dark, ugly stain that drew the eye irresistibly. A chalk outline marked the spot where Lord Harrington had met his end. While I took in the general atmosphere of grim luxury, Holmes had already dropped to his hands and knees, his magnifying glass produced as if by magic. For him, the room was not a scene of tragedy, but a document to be read, and he was its most discerning scholar. He began his examination not at the centre, but at the periphery, by the door, crawling in a slow, deliberate circle. His progress was snail-like. He sniffed the air, peered at the legs of chairs, and ran his long, sensitive fingers over the velvet curtains. To the constable at the door, this must have seemed the height of eccentricity, but I knew that Holmes was absorbing 1,000 minute details, any one of which might be the loose thread that would unravel the whole tapestry. "The police have been here, of course," he murmured, pointing with his lens to the scuffed prints of heavy-booted feet. "Lestrade's bulls in a china shop, but they keep to the centre. They look for the obvious, a drop button, a cigar ash. They do not appreciate the eloquence of dust." He had reached the large desk and was now scrutinizing the floor beneath it. "Ah," he breathed, a soft exhalation of satisfaction. He produced a pair of tweezers from his pocket and carefully picked up something from the carpet pile. Something so minuscule that I could not see it from where I stood. He deposited it into a small envelope, which he then sealed and placed in his wallet. He moved on to the desk itself. The surface was orderly. A silver inkstand, a neat stack of letters, a heavy brass paperweight. He did not touch the letters, but he bent low over them, reading the addresses and postmarks through his glass. Then his attention was captured by the heavy velvet curtains that framed the bay window. "This window was found unlatched, Watson, you recall?" "So Lestrade said, Holmes." Holmes drew the curtains back. The window was a sash type, its lower half raised by about an inch, allowing a sliver of the damp, cold air to enter. He examined the latch, the frame, the sill, both inside and out, with the most painstaking care. He seemed disappointed. "No scratches on the latch, no marks on the paintwork," he mused. It was not forced. It was either left open or opened from the inside. He peered out into the garden. The flowerbed below is soft earth, thoroughly soaked by the rain. And yet, he pointed. Look there, Watson. Those are the footprints of the constables. But where are the footprints of our fleeing murderer? A man vaulting the wall, Sir P. Lestrade so dramatically put it, would surely have landed in this soft soil. There is no mark here, none at all. Perhaps he leaped over it, Holmes, onto the gravel path beyond. A standing leap of some 10 feet in the dark and the fog after committing a murder. It is a feat worthy of an acrobat, unlikely for a common docker. No, our man did not leave by this window. This window is a piece of stagecraft, a red herring intended to suggest an entry and exit, which means the killer came and went by the door. He let the curtain fall and turned his attention back to the room. His gaze swept over the bookshelves, the fireplace, and finally came to rest on the side table bearing the sherry decanter. He walked over to it, uncorked the decanter, and sniffed its contents. "Amontillado," he remarked, "and a fine one. One glass has been used." He picked up the glass, holding it by the stem, and examined it against the light. No dregs. It was drunk. Now, a man does not typically pour a glass of sherry for his own murderer. It implies a visitor, one who was not, at least initially, unwelcome. He set the glass down and stood in the centre of the room, his eyes scanning every inch of the space one last time. I had seen him in this state of intense observation many times before, and knew better than to interrupt. His mind was absorbing, processing, connecting. "There's a faint scent in here, Watson," he said suddenly. Lestrade called it a chemist's smell. He was not wrong. It is subtle, almost gone. Can you detect it? I sniffed the air. Beneath the dominant odours of old paper, leather and polish, there was a faint, sharp, almost metallic tang. "I believe I can, Holmes. Something acrid." "Precisely. It is not a cleaning fluid for coins. It is something else, something photographic." He fell silent again, his brow furrowed in thought. He completed his circuit of the room and returned to the chalk outline on the floor. For a long moment he stood looking down at it, his face grim. "They say the wound was to the heart, a single, decisive blow," he said quietly. "This suggests either great skill or great luck, or perhaps that the victim was incapacitated and unable to defend himself." "There are no signs of a struggle," Lestrade said. "The furniture is all in its place. Harrington was a man of some vigour, I understand. It is hard to imagine he would sit placidly while a man approached him with a knife. He had one last look around and then seemed satisfied." "I have seen enough here, Watson. My academic curiosity regarding carpet fibres is quite sated." The constable at the door looked relieved as we made our exit. As we stepped out into the raw Kensington air, I turned to Holmes. "Well, what did you find? I saw you place something in an envelope." "A tiny shard of curved blue-tinted glass, Watson, no thicker than a fingernail." "And its significance?" "I have not the slightest idea," he confessed, much to my surprise. "Not yet. It is merely a fact, an anomaly. The world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. This blue glass is one of them. For now, it is enough to know that it was there. But the footprints, Watson, or the lack thereof, that is of immense and immediate significance. The murderer did not enter or leave by the window. He used the door, and that implies he was either a resident of this house or was admitted by one. The valet? Fields? I suggested. A man of 40 years' service? It is possible. Grief can be a most effective mask, but we must not form theories from insufficient data. Our next step is a less salubrious one. We must journey to Newgate Prison. I wish to meet this terrible murderer, Mr. Bert Stevens, in the flesh. I have a feeling he will be a very different man from the monster Lestrade has painted. As our cab rattled eastward, back towards the grim heart of the city, the pieces of the puzzle floated disjointedly in my mind. A phantom exit, a glass of sherry, a shard of blue glass, and a strange chemical scent. Separately, they were nothing. But I knew that in the extraordinary brain of my companion they were already beginning to coalesce into a pattern, a picture that would prove to be as shocking as it was unexpected. A prisoner in Newgate. Newgate Prison was a monument to human misery, a grim, soot-blackened fortress whose very stones seemed to weep with the despair of the souls incarcerated within. The air was cold and damp, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, boiled cabbage and carbolic soap. A surly warder, mollified by a note from Lestrade and a couple of shillings from Holmes's pocket, led us down an echoing stone corridor to the interview cells. Bert Stevens sat on a narrow wooden bench, his head in his hands. He looked up as we entered, and I saw a face that was not brutal or cunning, but simply bewildered and crushed by the terrible weight of his predicament. He was a sturdily built man, as his fiancée had described, with calloused hands that spoke of honest, heavy labour. His eyes, clear and brown, were filled with a hopeless terror. This was not the face of a cold-blooded killer. "Mr. Stevens?" Holmes began, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "My name is Sherlock Holmes. I have been retained by Miss Eleanor Vance to look into your case." The man's head shot up, a flicker of hope animating his features for the first time. "Eleanor? She sent you? God bless her. She knows I didn't do it, sir. She knows." "It is my business to deal in what can be known, not what is believed," Holmes replied, though not unkindly. "I am here to listen to your account of events. I must warn you that anything you say may be used, and that if I find you are lying to me, I shall drop the case instantly, and you will not hear from me again." "I'll tell you God's own truth, sir," Stevens said earnestly, leaning forward. "I've got nothing to hide." "Very well, let us begin with last night. Miss Vance says you were with her until 9 o'clock. "That's right, sir. I walked her home to her door in Stepney, and then I went down to the Winking Dog for a pint and a game of dominoes with my mates, same as I do most Thursdays." "And who are these mates?" Stevens listed 3 names. "Tom Riley, Bill Sykes, and old Pat Corrigan. We was there at our usual table in the corner." "And you remained there until closing time?" The prisoner's face fell. "That's the trouble, sir. I had a bit of a turn, a headache. The beer tasted sour on my stomach. I left early. I reckon it was about 10:30, maybe a bit later." This corresponded exactly with the time the cabby had supposedly seen him fleeing the Harrington house. I felt my hopes sink. "Did you speak to anyone on your way out?" Holmes pressed. "I said good night to Mr. Hobbs, the publican, but he was busy pulling pints. I don't know if he'd remember the exact time." "And you went straight home?" "As an arrow, sir. I was in my bed before 11 and slept like a log till the coppers hammered on my door this morning." "Mr. Stevens," Holmes said, his voice hardening slightly, "Lord Harrington was killed with your knife. Can you explain that?" Stevens shook his head, a look of utter bafflement on his face. "No, sir, I cannot. It's my work knife. I keep it in a leather sheath on my belt. But yesterday it went missing. I thought I'd dropped it somewhere on the docks. I spent a good hour looking for it in the afternoon, but it was gone. I never thought—" His voice trailed off in horror. "You mean someone stole it? To do that with?" "It seems a distinct possibility," Holmes said calmly. "Now tell me of your debt to his lordship." The man flushed with shame. "It was £50, sir, a king's ransom. My Eleanor's mother, she took a terrible inflammation of the lungs. The doctor said she needed private care, country air. It was that or the workhouse infirmary. I went to Lord Harrington myself. I'd done some odd jobs at his house, carrying crates and such, and he'd seemed to take a bit of a shine to me, said I was a hard worker. He lent me the money. He was a hard man, sir, but he wasn't unfair. He drew up a paper, and I've been paying him back 10 shillings every week without fail. I've never missed a payment." "So you had no reason to argue with him over the debt?" "None at all, sir. I was grateful to him. He saved Mrs. Vance's life for all that he drove a hard bargain." Holmes was silent for a moment, studying the man intently. "I have often observed that my friend's interviews were as much about visual observation as they were about oral testimony. He was taking in the man's posture, the sincerity in his eyes, the nervous tremor in his hands. "Show me your hands, Mr. Stevens," Holmes said suddenly. The man complied, holding out his large, work-roughened hands. Holmes examined them closely. "You are right-handed?" "Yes, sir." "There are no cuts, no scratches, no bruises on your knuckles. Interesting. One might expect a man who had just committed a violent murder to bear some marks of the encounter, however slight. And your coat, is it the one you were wearing last night?" "Yes, sir. The police took it, but it's the only one I have." "A heavy tweed, I believe?" "That's right." "Did you notice any strange substance on it this morning? Any powder, any stain?" Stevens looked confused. "No, sir, just the usual dockside dirt, I expect." Holmes stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Stevens. You have been most forthcoming. I will make no promises, but I will continue my inquiries." As we walked away from the cell, the prisoner's desperate voice followed us. "Please, sir, tell my Eleanor I love her and that I'm innocent. I swear I am." Once we were out in the grimy London air again, I could not restrain myself. "Holmes, his story about the headache and leaving the pub early is terribly weak. It places him on the streets at the exact time of the murder. It almost amounts to a confession." "On the contrary, Watson," Holmes replied, hailing a cab. "It is the one thing that gives me the greatest hope." "Hope? How can you say so?" "Because, my dear fellow, it is the truth. Think for a moment. If Stevens were our culprit, a cunning man who had planned this murder, stolen a knife and arranged an entry, would he not have also arranged a more solid alibi? Would he not have made a great show of staying in the pub until closing time, drawing attention to himself, ensuring that a dozen men could swear he was there? The story he tells, of a convenient headache, of slipping away unnoticed, is the confused, unhelpful, and hopelessly genuine account of an innocent man. He is not a clever murderer. He is a frightened victim of circumstance. Someone knew his habits. Someone stole his knife. And someone, I suspect, relied upon his early departure from the winking dog to leave him without a credible defence. But who, Holmes? Who would frame a simple dock worker? Ah, that is the question. We are looking for a man of great intelligence and forethought, a man who needed Lord Harrington dead, and who needed someone to take the blame. The profile does not fit any of our current players. We must widen our net. Our next visit is to the late Lord Harrington's next of kin. A man's family, Watson, is often the source of his greatest treasures and his most fatal dangers. The grieving nephew. Alistair Harrington, the nephew and sole heir to his uncle's vast fortune, resided in a fashionable set of apartments in the Albany, a far cry from the gloomy magnificence of the Kensington mansion. We were shown in by a valet whose supercilious expression suggested that we were not the sort of visitors he was accustomed to. The apartment was a testament to expensive, if somewhat garish, taste. Silks and velvets abounded. Objets d'art cluttered every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of Egyptian cigarettes and French perfume. Mr. Alistair Harrington himself matched his surroundings. He was a young man, no more than 30, with pale skin, languid eyes, and a meticulously groomed moustache. He was dressed in a sumptuous velvet smoking jacket and held a long ivory cigarette holder. He received us with an air of weary tragedy. "Mr. Holmes, I received your card," he said, his voice a carefully modulated drawl. "I cannot imagine what help I can be. The police have assured me the matter is concluded. A dreadful business, utterly dreadful, to think of my dear uncle being struck down by some common brute." "My condolences on your loss, Mr. Harrington," Holmes said, his face unreadable. "I am merely here to tie up a few loose ends on behalf of the accused's family. You understand, they cling to hope." Quite. A futile hope, I'm afraid." The young man sighed, sinking into a damask armchair. "The evidence is overwhelming, I'm told. A clear-cut case of a disgruntled employee." "You were close to your uncle?" Alistair Harrington made a show of examining his fingernails. "As close as one could be. He was my guardian, my benefactor. A stern man, Mr. Holmes, a very stern man. He did not approve of my lifestyle. He considered the arts a frivolous expense and the racecourse a path to damnation. We had our disagreements on financial matters, but blood is thicker than water, is it not?" "Indeed. And you are now his sole heir?" Holmes asked, his question delivered with the casual air of a disinterested solicitor. For the first time, a flicker of something other than sorrow appeared in the young man's eyes, a glint of cunning, perhaps. "That is my understanding. The estate is considerable. It is a responsibility I must now bear, a heavy burden. You were not at the house last night, I take it?" "Good heavens, no. I was at my club, the Bagatelle, until the early hours. 100 men can attest to it. I heard the dreadful news from a police inspector this morning." Holmes nodded slowly. "Your uncle, did he have any particular enemies? Anyone who might wish him serious harm?" "My dear sir," Alistair laughed, a short, brittle sound. "My uncle collected enemies the way other men collect stamps. He was ruthless in business. There was a nasty business with a South American shipping contract last year, drove a smaller firm into bankruptcy. Then there was the scandal over the factory conditions in Bermondsey. And personally, he was not a sentimental man. But to hire a killer? To plot his death? It seems so theatrical, so unnecessary. No, I am with the police. This was a random act of savagery by a desperate debtor." Holmes rose. "You have been most helpful, Mr. Harrington. I shall not take up any more of your grieving time." "Not at all, not at all," the heir said, escorting us to the door with a fluid grace. "Anything to see this sordid affair concluded and my uncle's murderer brought to justice." Once we were back on the street, I turned to my companion. "A rather unpleasant young man, Holmes, and he profits greatly from this tragedy. Do you suppose he could be involved?" He has the motive of inheritance, certainly, Holmes mused as he lit a fresh pipe. And his grief is as counterfeit as a £3 note. But his alibi at the club is likely genuine. A man of his standing would not invent such a thing without being easily found out. He is a dissolute and greedy young man, Watson, but he is not our mastermind. He lacks the nerve, the intellect. He is a jackal, content to feast on a lion's kill, but he is not the lion. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with the most overlooked figure in any great household, the servant. We must return to Kensington and speak with Fields, the valet. He has been there for 40 years. He will have seen everything, heard everything. The secrets of a family are rarely hidden from the man who lays out his master's clothes and serves his nightly brandy. Our second visit to the house of mourning was a different affair. The constable was gone, and the door was opened by a man whose funereal attire and sorrowful mien proclaimed him to be Fields, the valet. He was tall and skeletal, with a face so lined with grief it seemed to have been carved from weathered oak. He showed us into a small, sombre sitting room. "Mr. Holmes, the police mentioned you. I will answer what I can, though my heart is broken. 40 years I served him. He was a hard master, but a just one." "I understand your grief, Mr. Fields," Holmes said kindly. "I will be brief. I'm interested in your master's habits. Was there anything unusual about his behaviour yesterday?" The valet considered for a moment. "No, sir, not unusual. He worked on his papers all day. He had a visitor in the afternoon, but that was not uncommon." Holmes's interest visibly sharpened. "A visitor? The police did not mention a visitor." "They did not ask, sir. It was a brief meeting. A foreign gentleman, a sailor by the look of him. A rough-looking fellow with a scar on his cheek. They spoke in the study for 10 minutes. I heard raised voices. German, I believe it was." "German!" Holmes exclaimed. "Did you hear what was said?" "Only a few words as I passed the door, sir. I heard the master say, 'It is settled, the past is the past,' and the other man sounded angry, but he left peaceful enough." "And you did not see him again?" "No, sir. That was around 4 o'clock. This was a revelation, a heated argument on the very day of the murder. "And later that evening, Mr. Fields, you served his lordship his dinner?" "On a tray in his study, as was his custom when he was working. He touched little of it. He seemed preoccupied, disturbed. He asked for the Amontillado sherry around 9 o'clock. I brought the decanter and 1 glass, as he requested." "1 glass?" Holmes pounced on the detail. "Are you certain?" "Quite certain, sir. His lordship was not expecting company." "And yet the glass was used," Holmes murmured. "Could he have had a second visitor, one you were not aware of?" "It is possible, sir. After taking him the sherry, I retired to my own quarters in the servants' wing. I heard nothing until I came to wake him this morning and found that terrible sight." The old man's composure finally broke, and he covered his face with his trembling hands. We took our leave shortly after, Holmes handling the distraught man with a quiet compassion. "Watson, we are making progress," he declared, his step light and energetic as we walked towards the main road. "The plot thickens. A German sailor, an argument, a single glass of sherry for a man who was alone. What do you deduce from that?" "That the sailor must have returned, Holmes. He came back and forced his lordship to pour him a drink before killing him." "An interesting theory, Watson, but it does not fit the facts. Why would Harrington serve a drink to a man with whom he had quarrelled violently? And why would the man leave the glass behind? No, my interpretation is different. Harrington poured the sherry for himself. He was disturbed by his earlier visitor and took a glass to calm his nerves. Later, a second man arrived. A man he knew and did not necessarily fear. A man who did not require a second glass because his visit was to be a short and deadly one. Our task now is to identify this German sailor. He is the key. But how, Holmes? London is filled with sailors from every nation on earth. True, but sailors mean ships, and ships are logged at the Port of London Authority. We must discover which German vessels were docked in the Thames yesterday. It is a tedious but necessary piece of legwork, and for another line of inquiry I shall enlist the help of my special force. He referred, of course, to the Baker Street division of the Street Arab Detective Service, that ragged but remarkably effective network of urchins whose eyes and ears covered the city. By the time we reached our lodgings, Holmes had already dispatched a telegram to the port and sent a coded message to Wiggins, the leader of his irregulars. The fog had begun to lift, both in the streets of London and, I felt, in the complexities of the case. A new actor had stepped onto the stage, a mysterious, scar-faced German, and I had the distinct feeling that his appearance was about to change the entire nature of the play. The Baker Street Irregulars report. The following 24 hours were a trial of my patience. Holmes fell into one of his strange, introspective moods, spending hours scraping away at his violin, producing melodies so melancholy and complex that they seemed to mirror the tangled threads of the case itself. He barely ate and spoke only in cryptic monosyllables, his mind clearly working at a furious pace, far from the comfortable confines of our sitting room. Our breakfast on the second morning was interrupted by the arrival of Wiggins, the de facto leader of the Baker Street Irregulars. He was a sharp-eyed lad of about 14, with a grimy face and an air of street-bred authority. "Got something for you, Mr. Holmes?" he announced, accepting the shilling Holmes tossed him with a practised flick of the wrist. "Speak, Wiggins! What news of Alistair Harrington?" "Been following him, like you said. He ain't been grieving much, sir. Spent most of yesterday at his tailor's, then at a jeweller's on Bond Street. And last night he went to a right nasty place in Soho. A gambling den. Lost a packet, he did. Heard him arguing with a fat cove with a diamond ring. Said he'd pay him back when the old man's money comes through." Holmes nodded. "As I suspected, a vulture waiting for the carcass. And what of the docks? Did you make inquiries about a German sailor with a scar?" "We did, sir. Asked all over Wapping and Limehouse. Took a bit of doing. But we found a tavern keeper who remembered him. A big man, he said, with a duelling scar on his left cheek. Spoke English with a thick accent. He was from a ship called the Friesland, out of Hamburg. She docked 2 days ago and sailed on the morning tide yesterday, right after the murder. A real quick turnaround, the keeper said." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. "Excellent, Wiggins. This is of the utmost value. The Friesland, bound for Hamburg. You have done splendid work." After the boy had departed, Holmes sprang into action. "Watson, the net begins to close. The ship's hasty departure is deeply suggestive. The sailor confronts Harrington, they argue. Harrington is murdered that night, and the ship is gone by dawn. We must learn more about this vessel. I shall send a telegram to the Hamburg police, making inquiries about the Friesland and its crew, particularly a man with a scarred face." He scribbled a message on a telegraph form and dispatched it with our page boy. Then he turned to his small makeshift laboratory in the corner of the room. He took out the small envelope from his pocket and carefully tipped the shard beneath. Course. He had recovered from the crime scene onto a microscope slide. For the better part of an hour, he was silent, peering through the lens, adding a drop of one chemical, then another, from his array of stoppered bottles. I watched, fascinated, as he worked with the intense precision of a surgeon. "Curious," he muttered at last, straightening up. "Most curious. What is it, Holmes?" "This glass, Watson. It is, as I thought, from a photographic plate. Specifically, a German-made dry plate of a type known for its particular sensitivity to low light. The blue tint is a trademark of the manufacturer, Schleicher & Söhne of Munich. But more than that, there is a residue on the inner, curved surface, a trace of magnesium and potassium chlorate." "And what does that mean?" I asked, utterly bewildered. "It means, my dear friend, that this was not just a piece of a photographic plate. It was part of a flash mechanism. Magnesium powder, when mixed with an oxidizer like potassium chlorate and ignited, produces a brilliant, instantaneous flash of light. It is a technique used by photographers who must work in dark conditions." He began to pace the room, his excitement mounting. "Now, let us reconstruct. A man is in his study at night. A visitor arrives. The visitor is armed not only with a knife, but with a photographic flash device. Why? Perhaps to take a photograph of a document on the desk. But that seems needlessly complex. There is another possibility. A sudden, blinding flash in a dark room would be utterly disorienting. It would cause temporary blindness, confusion. It would render a strong man helpless for a few crucial seconds. Long enough for an assailant to step forward and deliver a single, precise and fatal blow without fear of resistance. I stared at him, aghast. Good heavens, Holmes, the ingenuity of it! It explains the lack of a struggle. Precisely. It is the work of a cold, calculating mind. Our killer is no frenzied docker. He is a methodical planner, a man familiar with both chemistry and photography. Lestrade's chemist's smell was not from cleaning coins. It was the lingering scent of the ignited flash powder. But who could it be? The German sailor? He is a possibility. Or perhaps he was merely a messenger, a warning. The man we seek is someone who had access to the house, someone who could walk in without arousing suspicion, someone familiar with photography. This narrows the field considerably. He stopped his pacing and looked at me, a strange light in his eyes. "There is one other person who fits that description, Watson, a man who has been before us all along, but whom we have dismissed." "Who?" I cried. "Fields, the valet. Fields!" I was incredulous. "The grieving, loyal servant of 40 years? It's impossible." "Is it? He has lived in the house for decades. He knows its every secret. He could move about it freely. He was the one who told us of the German sailor, perhaps to cast suspicion away from himself. His grief could be a magnificent piece of acting. But it is only a theory. We need proof. We must set a trap and see if our quarry will walk into it." He went to his desk and began to write. "I am composing 2 items, Watson. The first is a short, anonymous message for the evening papers, stating that the police, in their investigation of the Harrington murder, are seeking a man who recently purchased photographic chemicals, specifically magnesium powder." "That will alert the killer," I protested. "Exactly what I intend. It will make him nervous. It will make him fear that a trail exists. Now for the second item." He took a fresh sheet of paper. "This is a telegram to Mr. Alistair Harrington. It will read, 'Have discovered my uncle's second ledger. contains shocking revelations. Vital we meet. Say nothing to staff. Await my signal. Fields. You are going to forge a telegram from the valet? I asked, stunned by his audacity. It is a necessary deception. The greedy Alistair, believing the valet has found a secret account book that might affect his inheritance, will almost certainly confront him. We will be there to observe the encounter. If Fields is our man, the accusation of a secret ledger connected to his master's death, combined with the news item about the photographic chemicals, may be enough to shatter his composure and force his hand. If he is innocent, he will be merely bewildered and no harm will be done. It is a long shot, Watson, but the time for observation is over. The time for action has come. The trap is sprung. That evening, Holmes and I positioned ourselves in a dark and empty house for rent directly across the street from the Harrington mansion. From a grimy upper window, we had a perfect unobstructed view of the front entrance and the lighted windows of the ground floor, including those of the study. Holmes had a pair of powerful field glasses, and we settled in for a long and chilly vigil. The evening papers had been delivered, and I could only imagine our quarry reading the disquieting little notice about the photographic chemicals. Our forged telegram, Holmes assured me, would have reached Alistair Harrington at his club. Now all we could do was wait. The psychology of the thing is crucial, Watson, Holmes whispered, his breath misting in the cold air. If Fields is guilty, his mind is already a cauldron of fear. He believes his carefully constructed frame of Bert Stevens is holding, but our newspaper notice introduces a new, unforeseen variable. It tells him there is a loose end he did not consider. Then comes the confrontation with Alistair. The young heir, greedy and panicked, will accuse him of concealing a secret ledger. To the innocent, this is nonsense. To the guilty, it will sound like the walls are closing in. He will believe Alistair somehow knows his secret and may act rashly to silence him. For 2 hours we watched. Lights went on and off in the great house. A housemaid drew the curtains. A delivery boy brought a package to the servants' entrance. The rhythm of the household seemed to proceed with its funereal normalcy. I confess my doubts began to grow. The idea of the aged, grief-stricken valet being a master of chemical assassination seemed more and more fantastic. Then, shortly after 10 o'clock, a hansom cab pulled up. The flamboyant figure of Alistair Harrington emerged, and he stormed up the steps to the front door without pausing. "He is on time," Holmes murmured, raising his field glasses. "The jackal comes to demand his share." The door opened and Harrington disappeared inside. A light came on in the main hall. We could not see the figures, only their shadows moving against the wall. We waited. 10 minutes passed. 15. Suddenly the light in Lord Harrington's study, the very room of the murder, flashed on. Through the gap in the curtains we could see 2 figures enter the room. Holmes focused his glasses intently. "It is them," he said, his voice tense. "Alistair and Fields. Harrington is shouting, waving his arms. Fields is standing perfectly still. Too still." I strained my eyes, wishing I had a pair of glasses of my own. The pantomime continued. Alistair grew more agitated, pacing the room. Fields remained by the desk, a statue of deference. It seemed my theory was correct. The old man was simply baffled by his new master's accusations. Then everything changed. Fields took a step back towards the heavy velvet curtains by the bay window. Alistair, his back to the valet, was gesturing wildly at the desk where his uncle had died. In one fluid, shockingly swift movement for a man of his age, Field's hand darted behind the curtain and emerged holding a heavy iron fire poker. He raised it high. "Good God, Holmes, he's going to kill him!" I cried, starting to my feet. "Stay down, Watson," Holmes commanded, his voice like a whip crack. He was already moving, halfway to the door. "Our presence is required. Come!" We flew down the stairs of the derelict house and burst out onto the street. We ran across the road, our feet pounding on the cobbles. Holmes did not bother with the bell, but threw his shoulder against the great oak door. It shuddered, but held. "Again, Watson!" he roared. Together we crashed against it. There was a splintering crack, and the lock gave way. We stumbled into the hall just as a terrible, high-pitched scream echoed from the study. We dashed into the room to a scene of chaos. Alistair Harrington was cowering by the fireplace, his face a mask of terror. In the centre of the room, Fields, the valet, was locked in a deadly struggle with two of Lestrade's plainclothes officers. The fire poker lay on the carpet. Standing calmly by the desk, as if he had been there all along, was Inspector Lestrade. The valet fought with a wiry, desperate strength, but he was old and outnumbered. Within seconds he was subdued, his arms pinned behind him, his breath coming in harsh, ragged gasps. He glared at Holmes, his eyes burning with a venomous hatred that was terrifying to behold. Lestrade stepped forward, a smug smile on his face. "Right on time, Holmes. You set the trap, and I was happy to provide the cage. He came for the poker, just as you said he would." Holmes ignored him and knelt by the struggling valet. "It is over, Klaus Richter," he said, his voice low and clear. The man froze. The fight went out of him. His shoulders slumped, and a look of utter defeat washed over his face. He stared at Holmes, his mouth agape. How did you know that name?" he whispered in a voice that was no longer that of a grieving English servant, but one thick with a German accent he had concealed for 40 years. "The past is never truly the past," Holmes replied, rising to his feet. "And murder, Herr Richter, has a voice that will always, eventually, be heard. The final problem is explained. Back in the familiar, comforting clutter of 221B Baker Street, with a cheerful fire crackling in the grate and a fresh pot of coffee on the hob, Sherlock Holmes finally condescended to illuminate the twisting path that had led him from a wrongly accused docker to the capture of a cunning and ruthless killer. Lestrade had departed with his prisoner, still somewhat befuddled as to how a simple case had become so convoluted, but happy to take the credit. Alistair Harrington had been sent home in a state of nervous collapse, and a wire had been dispatched that would ensure Bert Stevens's release by morning. "You see, Watson," Holmes began, loading his favourite clay pipe, "from the very outset the official theory was riddled with contradictions. The sheer neatness of the evidence against Stevens was its greatest flaw. But the true turning point for me was in Lord Harrington's study. The lack of footprints in the garden bed told me the open window was a deliberate deception. The killer had entered and exited through the house itself, implying familiarity and access. This immediately shifted my focus to the household staff. But the sherry glass, Holmes. Fields swore Harrington was alone. And he was when he poured the drink. But my theory is that the killer was Fields himself. Imagine the scene. Fields enters the study on some pretext. He finds Harrington, already agitated from his earlier meeting with the German sailor, drinking a sherry. They talk. Fields, the loyal servant of 40 years, positions himself near his master. Then he triggers the flash device he has concealed, perhaps in a book or a folded newspaper. Harrington is momentarily blinded and stunned. In that instant, Field steps forward and uses the stolen knife. A single, silent blow. He places the knife on the floor, ensures the window is ajar, and slips away, his work done. He has a perfect alibi. He was in his quarters. Who would ever suspect him? It is diabolical, Holmes. But what was the motive? Why, after 40 years, would he murder the man he served? That, said Holmes, is where the German sailor comes in. My telegram to the Hamburg police received a reply this afternoon. The Friesland is a vessel known to them. It is often used by political agitators and fugitives. They confirmed that a crewman matching the description, a man named Gunther Schmidt, was aboard. But the most vital piece of information was this. They believe Schmidt was an associate of a notorious anarchist and revolutionary named Klaus Richter, who was responsible for a bombing in Berlin in the 1850s. Richter vanished after the attack and was widely believed to have fled to England under an assumed name. He paused, letting the pieces fall into place in my mind. Suddenly everything became clear. Fields, our devoted valet, was in fact Klaus Richter, the fugitive. For 40 years he had lived a quiet, hidden life. But somehow Lord Harrington had discovered his secret. Harrington was not a man to let such leverage go to waste. He was blackmailing his own valet. The argument with the sailor, Gunther Schmidt, was likely Schmidt begging or threatening Harrington to release his hold on his old comrade. When Harrington refused, telling him the past is the past, Schmidt left, and Richter knew he had to act. So the murder was to silence Harrington and protect his identity? Precisely. He could not afford to have his new life, so carefully constructed, torn down. Bert Stevens was the perfect scapegoat. Richter, in his capacity as a servant, would have been aware of Stevens, his debt, and his distinctive knife. It was a simple matter for him to steal it from the docks. He knew Stevens's habits and likely banked on him leaving the pub early and alone, leaving him without an alibi. It was a masterpiece of misdirection. "And the forged telegram to Alistair?" I asked. That was the final turn of the screw. I knew Alistair's greed would make him reckless. By suggesting Fields had found a secret ledger, I forced a confrontation. I gambled that Richter, his nerves already frayed by my newspaper notice about the photographic chemicals, would see this as the final threat. He would believe that Harrington had documented his secret and that Alistair was about to uncover it. His only recourse was to silence the nephew, just as he had silenced the uncle. The fire poker was a weapon of desperation, not of planning. My trap forced him to abandon his careful methods and reveal the violent man beneath the servant's mask. He leaned back, enveloped in a cloud of blue smoke, the case concluded. "It is a dark business, Watson," he said after a long silence. "A man lives a lie for 40 years, serving the man who is his secret tormentor. One wonders at the sheer force of will required. He was a formidable opponent, a man of great intellect and iron nerve, wasted on a cause of chaos and destruction. In another life, he might have made a brilliant detective." "And Bert Stevens and Miss Vance?" I asked. "They will be reunited tomorrow, their ordeal over. Their faith in each other has been vindicated. It is not often in our line of work that we're able to deliver such unadulterated happiness. It is perhaps the finest reward our profession has to offer." And so ended the strange case of Bert Stevens, the so-called terrible murderer. It was a case that had begun in the suffocating gloom of a London fog and concluded with the sharp, bright flash of a killer's audacious device. It served as a potent reminder, to me at least, that the most placid surfaces can conceal the most turbulent depths, and that the quietest and most unassuming of men can sometimes carry the most terrifying of secrets.